This is the Akai Fire. In case you haven't seen it before, this is a controller designed for use with FL Studio. Now, I don't use FL Studio, but I found this to be an interesting controller given the price point and the features that it offers. First of all, you've got a 16:4 matrix, and that's somewhat of a unique layout. And the matrix consists of buttons with RGB LEDs that are somewhat velocity sensitive. I'll show you what I mean by that in just a little bit. Surrounding the matrix, you've got 20 buttons that you can use for things like transport control and navigation. You've got 4 touch-sensitive encoders, and then a 5th encoder that's not touch-sensitive but has an integrated push button. And finally, you've got an OLED display. So those are some really great features. Now, the big question is, can we use this controller with software other than just FL Studio? And the answer is yes. This is a MIDI controller. It sends and receives MIDI messages, so it could be used with any software that supports MIDI. However, out of the box, it's really just going to function as a very, very basic MIDI controller. In order to make full use of its features, you really need something like a Control Surface Script or Max for Live device. And we'll look at why that is as we go through this video. So having said all that, let's look at using the controller in live. First of all, here's what you're going to see when you initially plug it in. Now you might see some LED flickering or rolling in this video. That's just the video though. The LEDs are solid. In order to use the controller with live, we need to go into Preferences and find the controller's input. We want to make sure that the track and remote switches are turned on. And then for the output, we want to make sure that the remote switch is turned on for that as well. All right, now we're ready to go. So the first thing you might want to do is use the matrix for playing instruments, and we can do that. All right, the notes are simply laid out chromatically, okay? One downside, though, is that they ascend as you move down. All right, so the lowest notes are up here and the highest notes are down here, which to me doesn't really make sense. Fortunately, we can change that pretty easily in live. I've got this track here called Fire Input, and it's got this rack on it, and what this rack is going to do is just flip the rows, all right, so that the notes ascend as you move up. So again, we've got this by default. All right, if we put the rack, turn the rack on here, now we have, okay. We've also got a pitch device here that's going to pitch the whole matrix down because by default it's going to start on F sharp. So this is going to move in an octave and a half down. In this way, it's going to start on C, and it's also going to line up with the drum rack, which we'll see in a second. All right. So now it's a little bit lower. Now let's talk about velocity sensitivity. All right, really, you've really only got 2 real velocity levels. You got soft and loud. There's not really any in between there. All right, I really don't like that, and so I've got this velocity device, which is just going to produce fixed velocities. Okay, so now if we go over to this drum rack, the bottom row is going to play the drum rack. Okay, now the next thing you might want to do with the matrix is use it to produce light shows, all right, like people do with launch pads. Unfortunately, that's not going to work because although the pads send notes, the LEDs are controlled by sysx messages, all right, so you can't just use a clip like a lot of people do to control its LEDs. Another thing you might want to use the pads for is Midi Mapping, and that works. We can go into Midi Mapping and maybe map to the device on-off switch here, okay, and now we can toggle that device on and off. We won't get LED feedback though because again, that's controlled with sysx messages, and that's not compatible with the Midi mapping system. Okay, let me remove that mapping. Oops. Okay. Now let's move on to the buttons. I guess the primary thing you might use those for is Midi mapping, and again, we can do that. So play button here, for example. All right, but again, we're not going to get LED feedback. These buttons send notes, so we can use them for MIDI mapping, but in order to control their LEDs, you need to send CC messages, which doesn't work with MIDI mapping, unfortunately. All right, now let's look at using the encoders for MIDI mapping. All right, so I'll go into MIDI mapping mode and map my first encoder to this pan control here. All right, and you'll see that this is a relative MIDI message, so I can get pretty fine adjustment if I turn slowly, and it features acceleration, so if I turn quick, I'll get coarser adjustment. All right, so that's pretty useful. All right, the other 3 encoders work the same way. This encoder does not feature acceleration, so if I map it, you'll see here that I just get fine adjustment with that, okay? All right, so that pretty much wraps it up. As you could see, we were really just getting a basic control out of this at this point. We're not getting any sort of LED feedback. Again, we need a script or a Max for Live device to accomplish that sort of thing. I'll be doing more videos that show how we can make better use of this controller. For now, here's a simple example. I've just set up a simple clip launcher, like an APC40 or something like that. The LEDs can reflect clip color. We can move around, and we can launch clips and scenes.